Folks, welcome into this space. I'm Rob Hanks, the minister here at Hamilton Wesley Uniting Church. I've been the minister here for 3 and a bit years since COVID arrived in the country, so it's been an interesting time. This building was opened in 1928 and we are just excited to have events like this one today here in what I hope becomes increasingly a community space in coming days, months and years. It's also home to Bill's Place home cooked cake cafe and op shop 5 days a week. Some people would be familiar with that, but we like the building to be open and be used. I want to welcome Reese. I want to congratulate him on the work that brings us to this launch today. I also want to do the practicalities of reminding you to put your mobile phone off or on silent. I'm a long-time member of the Wanderers Rugby Club here in Newcastle, and if we were in a gathering like this and your phone rang, it would be your shout. So maybe that's a rule we could evoke. The second thing I need to do is simply to let you know that the toilets and the bathrooms are through this timber door over here in the corner. They're set up as change rooms for the op shop through the week, so there's 2 different bathrooms there for you to use throughout the afternoon. I'm assuming I should say something like the refreshments and the drinks are still at the back, so avail yourselves of those and they'll probably still be there afterwards for the book signing. That's really all I need to do, but I also would like, on behalf of Hamilton Uniting, to offer an acknowledgement of country before you begin your festivities today. This one is in part inspired by the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Today, I acknowledge the Awabakal and Worimi people, among the first sovereign nations of this land and waterways, through law and custom, through time immemorial, paying my respect to elders past and present, extending this to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here with us today. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, a unique relationship with the land, never ceded or extinguished, coexisting with the Crown. How could it be that this sacred link disappears from human history in a mere 200 years? With power over tyranny, Aboriginal young people will flourish, walking in 2 worlds, and their culture will be a gift to this country. Perhaps through reckoning, through truth-telling and treaty, the great Southland can be as great as the one it could have been. It's my job now to hand over to our tireless advocate and MC for today, Councillor Carol Duncan.
Thank you, Rev Rob. It's a real pleasure to come and join you today and to assist with this book launch from Reese and the indefatigable work of Marilla as well, who has put on quite a spread here today. Marilla, well done. And Reese, we're looking forward to hearing from you as well. Rev Rob, thank you for that acknowledgement of country. I did just want to touch on that from the perspective of local government here in Newcastle, and I'm proud that this local government area had a majority of a vote in support on the referendum. And when people, just see what I mean about indefatigable? When people have asked me who may have had doubts or concerns what it meant, I would simply say the City of Newcastle for 25 years has had a committee called Gurakai, and Gurakai is essentially our voice to local government here in Newcastle. And the things that we learn from the members of Gurakai, not just over those 25 years, but every single day in doing what we can to ensure that that sort of inclusion continues, is incredibly important and incredibly valuable. So thank you, Rev Rob. And I think with the referendum, when you can't go through, Prof Maynard, you go round. And we will figure out how to go round. So I think a lot today has to do with truth-telling, and I think in Reese's poems there is a lot of truth-telling. and I'm sure Professor Maynard has some truth-telling for you. But we also have the brilliant Sue Morley here with us, who is a bit of a social conscience, I think, for us all in Newcastle. And Sue is a truth-teller. And I think it's really important that all of us try to do that as much as we possibly can, to tell our stories, to share our concerns, and to hope for better with every single little thing that we do. Sue does this, and she does it very brazenly and very boldly. I think Sue's had an occasional smack at me, but that's okay.
Heritage.
Heritage. Because you know I do what I can, don't you? I hope you know that. Because it is just really important. And from a local government level, when I see, though some of you may know my 25-year radio career, for me to translate that into what I do now as a councillor is when the organisation is asking for feedback on something, please do it. And people will say, oh, council doesn't listen anyway. They do. Doesn't mean you get what you want, sadly. Certainly doesn't mean I get what I want. But feedback from people is so very, very important. And that's what Sue does, what Sue Morley does large. She offers her thoughts and her concerns and her loves and her pains to all of us here in a community and says, here, this is my feedback. And it's really valuable. It is really, really valuable. And Sue's going to set the scene for us this afternoon. Thanks, Sue.
Thank you. I'm going to have to do something with these, though. Thanks for that very generous introduction, Carol. I am a bit of a heritage tragic, and there's one particular one I just didn't want to let go of. Thanks to Marilla for inviting me to be part of this. It's been a great little performance goal, and I've been kind of thinking about this tune for a while. Congratulations to Reese, getting your book done. And I'm very honoured to be here in the presence of John Maynard, and thanks, it's a really special thing, so thank you. This track, I went to the funeral of Vera Deakin, many of us probably did. She's a very significant figure in our local community, and strangely, there's a song that's been going around the folk traps for decades called Weevils in the Flower, and Declan Athley's version very big, and Bushwhackers' setting of the man who wrote it, the setting I can't. Anyway, Bushwhackers, Declan Athley, I know his kids actually. And so it's got its own, I've sort of cleansed my mind of those previous versions, picked out the verses that resonate most with me. There's maybe one I'll put back, but I didn't know until Vera's funeral that it actually was based, it started with the concept came from her life, living on Mosquito Island, on the river, and all those rivers have been filled in. It was a wonderful wetland and botanic garden, and my dad actually knew her sister who used to row across the river. And so Vera and my dad were both born in 1926. The lyrics of this were written by a poem as Dorothy Hewitt, and we share a birthday, so there's all these. But when I heard that Vera, it was about Vera, I thought, oh, gee, I should do that song. But there's one line in it that really didn't resonate with me, which is that when I grew to be a man, I want it to be more about Vera and just get the bloke out of the picture. So I just took a little bit of a liberty and changed a line or two. So here it is. It's Weevils in the Flower, on an island in a river, also known as Where I Grew to Be a Man, but not this time. I'm a bit awkward here. Sorry about your mics, I will put it all back. Okay. On an island in a river, how that bitter river ran. We lived on scraps of charity, the best way that you can. In an island in a river where I learned to take a stand. And just across the river stood the mighty BHP, poured pollution in the water, poured the lead of misery, and its smoke ran black as Hades, rolling hungry to the sea. Black bread and sour, there's grief in the taste of it, there's weevils in the flour. Yeah, dull bread is bitter bread, black bread and sour, there's grief in the taste of it, there's weevils in the flour. haystacks grew, and the hunger of the many filled the bellies of a few. There were cats on the river and men washed on the tide. They all became too commonplace on our riverside, and mothers couldn't leave and weep when newborn babies died. For dull bread is bitter bread, with weevils in the flour. There's grief in the taste of it, there's weevils in the flour. Yeah, dull bread is bitter bread, weevils in the flour. There's rage in the taste of it, black bread and sour, black bread and sour. There's weevils in the flour. We met beside the river where the ghosts of good men drowned. We picketed the steel mill and we banked our hunger down, with words that stung and deeds that hung and live things on the town. On an island in a river, how that bitter river ran. It broke the banks of charity, it baked the bread of man. On an island in a river where I love to take a stand. On an island in a river where I love to take a stand. On an island in a river where my life's long work began. And this is one of my songs, which is at the end of BHP. It's all coming down and we're wondering what next. And I did used to work at Newcastle City Council, as it were, and I spent a lot of time with the air quality woman, or the woman Carol, who did a lot of air quality monitoring and water monitoring. There was actually a little lab in the Roundhouse, which is now a 5-star hotel, and there was this period of time where the BHP pollution dropped out. And it's before, like we've always had the coal, but there's just a point where it just ramped up to billio. And there was just this little window of time in the 90s or early 2000s where the pollution dropped out. So that's where this song starts, but it is just sort of like a existential post-industrial kind of situation. That bookends the weevils quite well. Came down in our old steel town. 2,000 workers walked out the gates, and Lord knows what they're all doing now, 'cause it's not a place where things get made anymore. All the skills went out the door, and there's nothing made here anymore. In a year or 3, the air came clean, no sulphurous stench from the riverside, just dirty and no blast furnace orange skies anymore. The air was cleaner than before when the big Australian went offshore. But you've gotta be careful what you wish for. What's gonna fill the void when the old man dies? A city doesn't run on pride. Well, the clean air didn't last long at all, 'cause old King Cole grew out of control. Now we pay the price where the coal dust falls, and the boilermaker's still on the dole. He works no more, works no more. Coal is gonna leave you poor, and it's time the king the door. But you gotta be careful what you wish for. What's gonna fill the void when the old man dies? A city doesn't run on pride. All is gonna leave you poor, and it's time we showed the king the door.
Professor John Maynard is somebody that I'm sure you all know very, very well, and I've been really lucky over the last 15 or 20 years to have the opportunity to interview John on many occasions about books, dreaming stories, stuff, Paul McCartney, all sorts of stuff. And I think activism takes many forms, but at the heart of it is care, is caring. Sue's songs are activism, and they're about caring and remembering. And John's work over many years is also about caring and remembering. But I think most importantly, it's been about sharing. And I'm going to just refer back to The Voice for one moment. Even though it's called The Voice, ironically, it was actually about listening and being prepared to listen. John's father was also an activist. Grandfather was an activist. And the stories and the benefit that we all have to gain just by listening are immense. Because for people like me, I'm not going to lose anything. I'm going to gain a whole lot when I listen. Please welcome Professor John Maynard.
Thanks very much, Carol, for that kind introduction. And also want to thank Marilla for the kind invitation to come along and share the stage with Carol and Sue and Rob, and all to celebrate Reese's book. But I begin as a Warramai man by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we gather here today, the Pembalung clan of the Awabakal people, and I pay respects to elders both past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. We've had a few of the speakers touch on we are now post-referendum, and many of us carry deep disappointment and frustration. But we must pick ourselves up as the long fight for Aboriginal rights and justice goes on. It is important to understand that the demand for a voice to Parliament is not something new. My grandfather Fred Maynard and the Australian Aboriginal Progressive Association, they were the first all-Aboriginal political organisation to form in this country in 1924 in Sydney. They made a call in a widely published manifesto back in 1927. They demanded that all the state Aboriginal protection boards be abolished and be replaced by an all-Aboriginal board to sit under the Commonwealth Government to advise on Aboriginal issues. This was the first call for a voice to Parliament nearly 100 years ago. So we have been coping with disappointment and rejection for a voice, as I said, for nearly 100 years. On reflection, the voice referendum was another missed opportunity for the country to heal from the past and move forward to a future just and equitable for all Australians. We as Aboriginal people were willing to share with the wider community this country's greatest cultural treasure. That is, upwards of 65,000 years of Aboriginal connections to this continent. On reflection, the biggest disappointment of the referendum was the fact that most people in this country clearly know nothing of the past. My talk reveals the importance of our next step through truth-telling, and Rob commented on that, and Carol's also mentioned that. And Reese's work, and I'm sure his words will reflect that truth-telling is the next step on the journey. And in truth-telling is a greater importance of understanding the history of this country. Not just what has happened since 1788. Our people were here in the time before time began. We have come directly out of the dream time of the creative ancestors. Our people lived and kept the earth as it was on the very first day. This is a critically important in understanding in our current time of global warming, rising temperatures and sea levels, and catastrophic weather patterns, storms, floods and bushfires happening globally. Indigenous people are the ones to guide us through these turbulent times. We need to protect country and the environment. We have been doing that for upwards of 65,000 years. We've got this down to a fine art, or we did. The two main points of my discussion in a where to from here scenario are covered with this approach to truth-telling and also in caring and protecting the environment for future generations. These two key points are reinforced and supported through Reese North's beautiful and powerful book of poetry, What the Land Had to Say. Reese has captured Aboriginal life before 1788 and the tragedy of what followed the British invasion. I cannot commend this work more strongly. I think Carol should come back up here with me to now jointly say, let's launch the book together.
Yes. Oh, gosh. Reese, thank you so much. I will have you come and join us in just a moment so you can share your words with us. I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who's come along, to the Rev Rob for hosting us here, because, as he said, he wants this space to be so much more than just church, but a real place of community gathering, and I know he works really hard to that. I do want to pay tribute to Marilla, Reese's sister, who has worked so hard, not just on local history and heritage and her love for this region, but on helping ensure that Reese's words have been published in this beautiful book, What the Land Had to Say. So I think we can announce it.
Launched. Thank you.
Can I just grab your book for a moment, Reese? There was one little piece that I just wanted to refer to in this. My family have been Sydney people for a very long time. And there was a comment in here, Reese, where you had written about one of your friends at school when you were very young.
My teacher, Dr. Doddle.
Yep, and Archie, the story of Archie.
Oh, Archie, yeah,
Yep.
that's the back lesson in the back story.
Yep, and the story of Archie is probably, sadly, all too common, and I guess probably in many, many ways still is. But you made a comment in here about how you didn't understand, you weren't aware of the difference, that Archie was just your mate. My family left Sydney for reasons that I'd always assumed were due to, the premature baby scenario of the 50s. And I found out last year that that was not why my family left Sydney at all and moved to northern New South Wales to a freedom ride town. That's another story. It's got nothing to do with why we're here today. But it was a freedom ride town in which our friends, the children of artist Robert Campbell Jr., were our neighbours, and Uncle Bob worked with my dad. Dad helped him open his first bank account, and all of those things that should be really simple that we take for granted. But a few years ago, Reese, I contacted the school that I spent my first 2 years in before my family took us back to Sydney. And I said, have you got copies of my school photos? And I thought they'd say no. but they did. They had copies of these photos from, I think, 1972, 73, kindergarten and first class. And they sent me copies, and I was just so delighted to see them. Until I realised that Uncle Bob's kids weren't in my school photos.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And I asked my dad about it, and he was like, I have no idea. But growing up in a town like that, a town called Bowraville, yeah.
Bad stories there.
Bad stories. Bad stories. Hopefully my family's contribution there for 20-something years was a good story.
Yeah.
But Uncle Bob was my uncle. He was my dad's best friend for many, many years. And I know he would love to read your book. Come and join us, Reese North.
Wow. You'll have to forgive me, I'm just getting over laryngitis. Whether it was psychological or not, I don't know. If you really want to know me and where I come from, just read the author's introduction. I don't want to explain it all to you. Other than I was adopted into a tribe, which is a very hard thing to understand for non-Indigenous people. It was hard for me to understand when it happened. But I'm just going to read the dedication. I dedicate this book, What the Land Had to Say, to the following three people. Mr. Dieball, my primary school teacher, who taught me that sometimes you have to fight to keep justice alive. The very wise old Aboriginal law man from the New South Wales South Coast who adopted me into his tribe and taught me that love can overcome any obstacle to make this world a better place, and that great things do come from small beginnings and from the heart. And the Aboriginal Birrik woman, a Birrik is a spirit woman who the land speaks through. An Aboriginal Birrik woman from the southwestern district of Victoria who showed me that there is a spiritual dimension to life that we all share, which gives life meaning as long as we keep truth and love alive. Okay. Now this book is divided into two suites. The first one is the 14 poems I want to do now on the Aboriginal aspects of what the land had to say. The other suite is just about Australia, how I saw it in other different ways, through love, through nature, homelessness. It deals with a whole variety of themes, that second suite in the book. The first suite, to me, is the most important part. Prelude is before 1788, the first three poems, and they each have a story around them, but time won't allow me to go too much into that. So I'll just let the poems speak for themselves. Night folds round, shadows touch a cavern deep inside the rocks, a giant sky god painted in red ochre on smoke-dark walls, his ancient visage sharpened by countless custodians whose hands shape the artist, time. The Fire Stick Farmers. This was inspired by a painting by an artist by the name of Fiona Hooper. I liked to be able to put this piece in because when they came in 1788, they came under they used a convention called the New Convention, which delineated the civilised nature of the Indigenous people as to whether they were worthy of being negotiated with for sovereignty or not. And in their ways of measuring, the Aboriginal people of Australia failed every one of their tests. One of them was farming. They didn't understand the nature of Aboriginal farming at all, and many other aspects of the culture they totally missed. Perhaps they wanted to miss them so that they could declare terra nullius, which would make it a much easier land grab, which is what happened. The Fire Stick Farmers. Fire sticks lick greenery black, crackling leaves breathe white, yellow and purple into an evening sky. A rainbow lorikeet opens its wings, adrift upon a warm current of air. A platypus dreams in a tea-brown creek, safe in a womb bag of water. Hardwood seeds burst open to wait for a darker soil, mixed with ash and humus and moisture. A nearby valley echoes a fire dance. Didgeridoos commune with spirits who dwell within a timeless realm. Their dark eyes spill tears into a smouldering cloud. A still lake mirrors swirling figures, while red flames leap from fern to shoreline, where tribal tongues sing life into a hungry land. I was told a story by an Aboriginal who said this is a common legend all around amongst Australian Aboriginals, that a couple of years before the coming of the white man in 1788, there was a sense of an incredible cataclysm was about to hit their culture, more potent and more destructive than even the Ice Age. And some of the elders in the tribes began to die as a consequence of this feeling of some terrible menace coming from over the waters. Whether you believe that or not doesn't matter. They believe that. So I wrote this poem in response to that. Omen. Swarms of bats glide through the light of a blood moon. Thunder hammers, clouds break. A curlew shrieks as it sinks into mist, with eyes that speak of the wilderness of stars and the mysteries of breath. Now, what the land had to say, what the omen was all about. The first poem deals with 1788 itself, the tall ships of 1788. The camp was quiet. Only the old ones and the watchers were wide-eyed and listening. The watchers stood silently on the cliffs looking out to sea. The moon was full and stars were fires in the timeless black. The dingoes slept fitfully. Evil gunjas tormented their dreams. Occasionally a growl, a moan, a bark would echo through the stillness. The old ones quivered. They sensed the birth of a new horizon without a sun. The moon crept higher. Its light was filled with bad dreams. The elders knew that the Burais who slept had to be protected. Their dreams kept sacred, as the dreams of Burais must, if they are to see with the light of the sun and touch the dreams of the stars. The elders roamed quietly around the camp. They placed an initiation tooth in the sacred bag of each newborn warrior. The elders knew they could not sleep. They knew a battle was about to occur. No spears or nulla nullas would be called for, only the power of their totems. A cruel wind growled in the hills and the air in the camp grew ugly. The old ones sat, stifled by the presence of alien totems. The coals on the fire exploded, the sea raged on the rocks, and the watchers stood mute on the cliffs, looking out to sea. Two dingoes roused from their sleep. They glared in rage. The dust sprang to life between the two, and they lunged at one another with claws and teeth bared. They grappled in a tearing scream of hate. They cowered as the wind sighed in the trees, and a tiredness overcame the watchers who stood mute on the cliffs, looking out to sea. The young warriors whispered in their sleep, drew a breath and heaved a sigh as an old one waned, tired. Death jangled in his chest. A howling of the people rose with the waning moon. The sun rose blood red, and the watchers knew the first blood of their people had been drawn when a white sail burned on the horizon. A sour smell fouled the air, and the dingoes growled their omens. Frontier violence, there was so much of it that I read, it made me sick. I couldn't write much about it other than to encapsulate it in as small categories, as small poetry as I could, because there's more than enough reflected in the later poems anyway. Nightmare. Restless grey fingers tear open the skin of the land. A monster awakes. Plunder. A furious crow watched a magpie tree fall under the noonday saw. Okay. Everything from here on in is in the first person, me speaking. What I experienced directly. Broome, Western Australia, 1981. I sat with lepers in an aluminium box, 6 foot by 10 foot, to house a family, 30 in one row by 20 in another. I walked across dry sand littered with medicine bottles, beer bottles, broken bottles, to a row of quiet tents, away from the violence, away from the shadow of the police station, where stood the only water tap to quench the thirst of 200 Aboriginal people. I sat with the anguish of old ones in love with life, old ones who cried in grief, old ones who have accepted the Catholic way but not denied the land, because they own no land and they own all. The meek ones, the dreaming ones who sing love, old ones who gathered pearl shells from the sea. With the pearl shells they built an altar out of respect for love, the foundation behind it all. Then they walked to the open sea, crying tears of salt. A sacred land. I was taken to a sacred site by 2 very close people, my brother-in-law and my wife of the day. They wanted to show me something about the spiritual dimension that is real, because they could see I was caught between my scientific Western mind and the influences I was coming under, living inside of Aboriginal culture and being shown all this stuff. Quite a privilege. Something I didn't recognise how privileged I was to get that close. I think Roland Robinson called it as near as the white man gets. A sacred land. I slept in the shade of a sacred land. A bush breeze spoke to me of ghost grey boughs, gum red flowers, and afternoon shadows on water blossoms. In the evening, moonbeams splashed over the land. Green mists rose where rivers snake, and dreams of sleeping creatures roused the silent wings of owls. I woke in the shadow of a sacred land. There sat the old man watching faces in the flames, both warmed and chilled by the open hearth of his memories. He spoke deep into twilight about smokestacks on his riverbanks, the wound that bleeds within his soul, of a shadow that breathes over his people, and of beauty that was old, the wisdom of a land beyond time. He took me down around the stones, spoke of a cave into the rock. He told me of a spirit there, where the tiger snake resides, and of the eagle's eyrie. Out in the wind a wild bird's song echoed inside the caverns and rippled along the billabong. Beside the Loamy River we heard a woman's song. Her withered lingo mourned remains of murdered bones, the last massacre of her people back inside the stones. Her mourning song flowed on the river, flowed on out to sea. A sunbeam burst through the salt mist and set her morning song free. If you listen to the breeze back inside the stones on a summer's afternoon, a black flower opens and hums a sacred tune. Strange Fruit. With respect to Abel Mirapol, author of the song Strange Fruit, and Billie Holiday for her vocal rendition of the song. Must acknowledge. My wife was Aboriginal lady, went out one day with a lot of white feminist women, and she came home really angry because their understanding of womanhood was so different to hers. And I said, okay, well, what is womanhood to you? Strange Fruit. A perspective on the meaning of womanhood as shown to be by an old Aboriginal woman who had lost most of her tribe to massacres and disease during the last 2 centuries. She plucked a grapefruit and peeled the skin with fingernails bared. Pointing at the skin in the palm of her hand, she said, "This I will leave behind when I die, but it is not me." She tore the pith, wrenching it away like a blister from a cocoon. "This I will leave behind." The juices flowed, bittersweet blood. Hints of generations to come were spun in the air, and the room filled with mysteries as the ancient wove a lesson of the eternal. A seed lay exposed in the mould of its creation. This I am. You have to remember, during those massacre years, terrible warfare up to around the 1860s especially, the women gave up birthing. They didn't want to bring children into this world anymore. And there was a very big drop in Aboriginal birth rate. So the desire to repopulate is a very powerful thing in a culture that has been treated with such evil intent. And I understood what she said from that. Okay, I've tended to steer away from didactic poetry for fear that it's, you can get very, very much like a lecture. But Bob Dylan got away with it, so I thought, well, why not me? So I had a go at it. An experience where I went to a funeral with my wife in Redfern, and through the abject poverty to see that, and then come back to a very wealthy home. The two images just clapped, and I sat down and I wrote this word for word. It's one of those very rare poems that just come from inspiration. From the Corridors, Redfern, Sydney, 1984. I've seen your diamond rings, heard of your fur-lined underwear, stolen visions from your Sunday morning eyes, watched you roll along the cold streets where the stony gaze of Indigenous eyes glare at the back of your icy car. From the back room of the railway pub in Redfern, I felt the cold wind of desolate visions blow against my back, felt the hand of rage claw towards my throat. I've walked the black streets of Redfern, where hollow corridors behind open doors stare vacantly at the world, where the cruel draught of poverty whistled in my ears. Your corridors are locked and barred till I storm your moat with my credit card and see your character on your walls, read your character in your bookshelf, see your couch where you idle away your greedy hours in the banquet of your fantasy. I've seen the dreams of children shattered in the morning light when the pangs of hunger have burgled them from their sleep, when the hollow ring of empty cupboards has driven them into the streets where the only law of values means staying on your feet. I've heard it from the mouths of the hungry. The ghettos are the bones of your banquet. But in your room of rare books, you still parry with philosophies and play games with the wise words of the ancients. I've seen the fist raised. The winds of change blow cold off the land. Soliloquy, Botany Bay, 1988. The Tall Ships of 1788 and this poem really are a contrast. 200 years later, bicentenary, Botany Bay Hotel, one Aboriginal man sitting in there surrounded by mostly non-Indigenous people. All that going on out in the streets. A lot of what was photographed was by the media was completely cut off the Aboriginal side of it. I was there down in the southwestern district of Victoria when the message stick went through inviting all Aboriginal people to come and join in this march against the 26th of January, the coming of the invasion fleet. It started a massive movement from all over Australia. You can get a lot of that stuff out of your libraries now. There's one called 1988. You've got to go and watch it. And it was like a big snake weaving through the streets. All the traditional people dressed up in all painted up, all their gear, clapsticks, dancing, chanting all the way through, followed by this massive tens of thousands of people, many of them non-Indigenous, which I was like, wow, look at this. You know, you don't realise how many non-Indigenous people are in there and understand it. 40% apparently from the vote, I put that at 6.8 million people, would have voted yes. Voted yes. Sorry. And I think that's a good beginning. And I think in truth-telling, why don't non-Indigenous people get up and tell what they see that they find disgusting about the way Aboriginal people are treated? And the two groups unify in this truth-telling, because in that unity is a tremendous amount of strength. Without the two joining together, it won't get there. People like, well, I'm going to say me, you know, but there's plenty more out there. Why not get up there and start telling your truth? How you see and how much it disgusts you what's going on in this country. So soliloquy, Botany Bay, 1988. Lantern candles glow red in the dim pub light. A harlequin nestles in the shadows, watching the babble of 1,000 voices. Like fish in a tank, the crowd swims through the smoke, unfolding currents spread in their wake. The dance of shades has begun, summoned by that shaman, wine. Faces open beneath the armour of night. A drunken teardrop trails along a wet glass. Swaying ice cubes clink in rhythm, tousled hair and tired grins. The harlequin begins to swim. Dandelion eyes pollinate the air, startling an unbedded rose. The thief of innocent hearts steals a sunbeam and plats it in her golden hair. Dark corners and crevices, crimson fire in glittering eyes, the cannibalistic talk of criminals bent on despair. Lizard tongues lick at the air, plotting the downfall of souls. A Birrick man whose songlines were stolen isolates a far corner. A no man's land of static silence charges the atmosphere surrounding him. Bombarded by a sea of glances, his solemn whirlpool gaze confronts flashes of ice blue. Confused green sympathy shrinks away. Wide brown ogles shamelessly entranced. A harmless drunk bumps his table, then turns to meet those whirlpool eyes, rivets in shock, and like a wounded child in an unmappable land, staggers on. To the cacophony of 1,000 voices, he tilts his glass in fine farewell and vanishes into soliloquy. The next poem, Nomad, I've always loved what songlines actually mean. I've really been intrigued by what it actually means, because you see these stories, these songline stories, and they just seem so simple on the surface. And then to get inside them, you realise there's a whole lessons being taught through these songlines to the young when they're taken out to become men. And they sing the land, and it's actually telling how the ecology works, how to treat it, when it's time for a fire to happen and when it's time to let it lay fallow. The songlines have so much to teach about ecology. And I often wonder, when humanity, if or when we become extinct, what the songline's going to be then. Who's going to write that one? Mother Nature writes it. And we humans interpret it. Who's going to be around to interpret what humanity was if or when we ever become extinct? Which by the looks of it isn't too far off. So I wrote this poem with that in mind. Nomad. Silent light of the evening star rises behind a blue moon. Beneath the warm mystery of a gypsy night, a town enshrouds itself in cold neon. Inside the streets, streams of faces caught within their visions. Bag ladies bunch in the mouth of an alleyway, pass a bottle and stare into an empty dream. An industrial sun at midnight blazes across the delta. At the edge of town, a quiet traveller passes into a world of starlight. He follows a heart of Stone Age wisdom and listens to the harmony of timeless creation. He follows a silence that waits in the core of a violent earth to compose the song of humanity. Just trying to hold on to this voice. This is hardcore truth that was told to me by my ex and what she puts up with every day. Like what every single Aboriginal woman in a racist town would have to go through. And this is what she goes through. I know a lady who, for her, history is an agony. Her people were murdered systematically and randomly. She lives in a town here in Australia. She hides because she feels surrounded by the enemy. She tells me in supermarkets the locals stare at her with hatred in their eyes. Taxi drivers terrify her because she's in their clutches once the doors are shut and the driving begins and they get to know where she lives. She tells me nights are the worst when rocks rain down on her corrugated iron roof and the anonymous voice in a telephone at midnight telling her what he's going to do if she doesn't leave town. She tells me not far from where she lives, 2 centuries ago, many of her tribe died in agony, poisoned by flour, laced with arsenic, brought to her land by the invaders. I found a diary written by a settler 2 centuries ago. He heard wailing in the bush. He found dead babies, their blue lips glued to the poisoned breasts of their dead mothers. She tells me her truth. She doesn't lie. She has nothing to gain. She has left me haunted by the images she lives with every day. This poem, second last, so I did want to read one more from another section. This is the last one in this sequence. It's called A Bird. It's retrospective, written from where I live now, just reflecting on what I'd been through in those 14 years. It has an epigraph, a quote from an Aboriginal elder. A bird. It's a place where many of my people were massacred. It's in a valley where the birds don't sing, as told to me by a tribal elder. The trees outside my window are twisting in the wind. Beyond Sugarloaf's distant peak, I know the angry land that stretches all the way to Weeper and west across to Broome. I've seen her dying rivers and dust bowls that once were green. It's strange to think of all the people I met along the way, their hopes, their moods, the fires we shared with the blaze of desert stars. On the open plains of the Nullarbor, I smoked with the brown-skinned people. They told me of a bird that had followed me from Broome. It's Birrick, Spirit, see you safe to your home. In the evening they sang their songs. By the morning they were gone, like shimmers off the sand in the midday sun. Behind the walls of the Grampians, I saw the ruins of a stone hut village. Fish traps clung to the floor of a creek that swelled and emptied with the changing seasons. When the moon came up, I heard the rhythm of pounding feet, smelled odours of oil and sweat. Ceremonial rings scored the earth where tribes had celebrated origin and birth. There was gratitude here. In the cold grey of a wet autumn morning, the wind roused me from my dreams. Aromas of decay rose off a stream in the valley where the birds didn't sing. I walked through mist to the heart of silence. An elder said, remember this day. Back on the Hume I knew freedom. I'd learned what the land had to say. A bird is perched on the bough of a tree outside my window. It waits for me. And the last poem is, I think, it's just to take us out of that dimension for a moment, to realise we are all in the same dimension together. We're all walking around in eternity now. We don't have to wait to die to get there, we're in it now. And I don't think a lot of people realise that sometimes. So I wrote this poem to sort of just bring us all together as one lot of human beings. We're not separate races, we're human beings. We're all together. All this race stuff, it's just a concept. Like nations. Nations were followed empires, didn't they? Had empires, now we've got nations. And now look at that's caused at each other's throats every day. So I called this one Boundless, and it's about Newcastle. On the shores of Ash Island there is a cove shaped as a horseshoe made of sand and seashells. The smell of salt is thick here, and brown seaweed clings like mermaids' fingers to an ancient rock that juts above the water just before the ocean makes its presence felt. Its bogey, the undertow, can drag you out beyond the lights of Stockton to a place where even Nobby's lighthouse disappears. I go there sometimes, to that place beyond the lights. I lie there in a wooden skiff, my head upon a pillow, propped against the prow, where I watch the stars and listen to the lapping wet and divine the depth below me. There is peace here, a peace I've never known before, a sense of things, of meanings that take no shape in words. I go there sometimes, to that place of stars, where sky and sea are mirrored and horizons don't exist. Thank you.
You're going to take over now, right?
I will.
Good.
Okay. I'm Joe Flood. I'm the publisher along with Marilla. And I just have to say what a privilege it is to be able to publish this book. This is actually the first time that we as yarn spinners and deluge have hung up our shingle. And we've got a little smorgasbord of goodies back there that we've been putting together this year. And we'll do even more next year. But I'll show you what we've been up to, which is available at the moment. We've got Singing Back the River, which is about Vera Deakin. It's a story of a set of things she wrote and that was written about her by various people, especially Marilla. We have What About the People? This is by my mother, Dorothy Hewitt, and her husband, Merv Lilly. It's a set of revolutionary songs, I guess you could say, written in 1960 or before. I helped put together the original book. I was about 11 years old and I had to gestatin them all up and stick them together. So that was my first venture into publishing, you could say. And we decided, because my mother's 100th anniversary, to put that book out this year, which we did about a month ago. And it contains Island in a River, which Sue sang. I was actually going to be Sue's support act today, but but I chucked it in because we had too much else to do. And I was going to do Thou Shalt Not Steal. And so that's a book I can strongly recommend. It's an oldie but a goodie. It's originally published in 1961. Now we've got a limited edition, which the original one has become a collector's item, which fetches $600 or so. So you never know. Hang on to this if you happen to get one. Marilla's also produced this little book called Lucky in Love, which is a play about her famous person, Dimphna Cusack, a novelist of and playwright of the 1930s. We have Hecate, which is feminist journal, and we got this because it's my mother's 100th anniversary, and there's a picture of her on the front. And in it is a short story, my first published short story actually, at the age of 73. And it's called Big Dog and Man. And it's about a big dog, which was our dog. And this dog was kind of like Red Dog. He did all sorts of amazing adventures and was almost famous. But there was a man who wanted to be very much like that dog, who was my stepfather. And he couldn't quite make it. And I think we've got one reader of the story here which can recommend it. And I've had a number of people come up and say what a great story. So if you'd like to read it, there it is. We've got Steel City Sue's Boomtown CD with us. We've got some copies of that if you'd like to pick it up. And last but not least, we've got What the Land Had to Say, which we're actually selling it at less than cost today because it's the opening. And Marilla brought this up and said, what do you think? I said, well, we've got 3 other things we're doing. Then I read it and I thought, I burst into tears in a couple of places. I said, what a great book, what a clear voice. We have to do it. And we're proud of this book. It's a beautiful little book. It's got a very clear voice in it, as I've said. And I doubt we'll ever get a book as good as this again to do. So I think it'll make a great Christmas present. Why don't you pick up a few while you're here? So thank you.
Dr. Joe Flood, thank you. So the books are, and Sue's CD are all available at the table at the back. Marilla, can you come down just for a moment? And she's going, oh no, what is she doing? I know, yes, she is, but she shouldn't. It's been a real privilege, Reese, to be here and to facilitate this for you today. Thank you so much, and congratulations. Thank you for sharing those stories with us. Marilla, thank you for all of the work that you do in sharing stories, other people's stories, your brother's stories, and the stories of Vera and the people of this region as well. You're amazing, and it really has been a privilege. Professor John Maynard, thank you so much for being here, and to the Rev Rob for having us at your place. Thank you so much. Now, I think we have to draw a raffle. Did you want to speak, Marilla? You should.
Sell a few more tickets for the raffle if we can.
Oh, okay. Who hasn't got raffle tickets yet?
Sticking to practicality.
Okay, I'll
Yep.
come around and get some.
Yep.
But also, just for
Come
last-
on, come.
My brother I'm very proud of, as you probably can tell. He and I have shared a lot of sorrow in the last few years. We shared taking care of our mother together with dementia, and then we shared the death of our dear brother Christopher together. And we've been through a lot, and my admiration for Reese's genuine commitment to Tina, his first wife, to the Indigenous people he travelled with. And Reese taught me so much. I was working in New Redfern, near the Aora Centre, when he came back from that first trip. And that poem about seeing diamond rings and fur underwear was about my house. And I have never had fur underwear. But anyway, I was comparatively well off because I was a public servant and I owned my own house. And he had seen the degradation that we brought to our First Nations people. And the reason we've done this book is that we want the rest of Australia to hear this voice, Joe and I. We want everybody to know the experiences so they too can open their eyes and look if they haven't seen themselves, and feel from the heart, as Marcia says, feel from the heart what we need to do to turn this around. Truth-telling will out.
Also.
Marilla, thank you. Okay, so the job to be done now is just to sell a few more raffle tickets, because there are some wonderful prizes that Marilla mostly has donated, and they're fantastic. The books are all available as well. But again, thank you enormously. Sue, thank you. And to all of you for coming along. There's also snacks, there's some wine, and we'll enjoy that over the next hour or so. But for the raffle tickets, jump in. Thanks so much for being here.